Okay, so there's a fairly common scenario where you want to bind two properties together with data binding, but they aren't of compatible type. And we can use converters in order to make that work declaratively. So imagine here I've got my page.xaml. Maybe I want to build something that looks a bit like a traffic light. So into here, into my grid, I want to put an ellipse. I want to set the fill, and I want it to be data bound to, let's say, light or status of the traffic light. That's what I want. So I'm going to build a data class that represents a traffic light. Let's go ahead and add in a new class here. Let's call this traffic light, something like that. So we have a traffic light. Traffic light has a status, so let's put an enumeration in here. We'll call it traffic status, and that will be, I guess, stop, ready, go, something like that. And on the traffic light here we'll have a property that represents that, and we'll also implement iNotify property change, which we talked about in a previous video, for reflecting changes to properties. So we just add that event in there for showing when properties change. So now we'll add a public property to this thing. We'll add a public traffic status, something like that. We'll call it status, and we'll have a get, and we'll have a set, and we'll have a private bit of state of type traffic status. We'll call that status. On the get, of course, we just return the status, and on the set, of course, we go ahead and change the value. So we say status equals value, and then we say if the property changed event is set, then we go and call anyone who's registered for that, and we create a new event args and pass the property name, which for us is status. So we did that in a previous video and looked at simple data binding. Okay, so we've got our class, and we can go back to our XAML file, which is already binding to status. So we can go to the code behind this, and we could say that at the point where we've loaded the content here, we could go and say that the layout root, which is our root grid, has a data context, and we could create a new one of those traffic lights, and on the traffic light we could set its status to be I don't know, let's say stop. So we should get a nice red light. Of course, we're not going to get a nice red light, because when we go and run this code, what we'll find is that you can't really bind between the fill of an ellipse and the status of a traffic light. It would be very nice if you could, but we didn't quite get to the point where any of our frameworks are smart enough to make that kind of thing happen. So there is no conversion between those two things, so it's just going to fall apart essentially at that point. Now, we could go and write code to manually change the color of the traffic light, but we can actually go and plug in a conversion routine, and that will allow us to go in a one- or two-way manner between the thing that we're binding to and the recipient of that bound data. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go and add in another class. We'll add in a class here. We'll call it converter, just to be simple, and we'll get that to implement iValueConverter, and we'll go and implement that interface. And it's a two-way interface. Excuse me. It's a two-way interface. We have convert and we have convert back. Okay. So let's just go and implement this in the simplest way. Let's do convert first. So what we'll do here is we'll say, right, okay, we'll take the value that's coming in. We should naturally check what types are being converted, but we're only going to use this in one place. So we'll go ahead and we'll take the value that comes in, and we'll say that traffic status, which is our enum, equals value as, actually let's just cast that because it's a value type, traffic status, the value that comes in. And we'll set up a solid color brush. We'll say that the brush equals a new solid color brush, and we'll use the color, let's go for red. We'll return the brush at the end of the function, and you're always going to end up with red. Let's just switch on the status that comes in, and we've already done red effectively. So if you are at ready, we'll say brush equals new solid color brush. We'll pass the color of orange. This is slightly wasteful in the way that I'm doing this, but we'll also create another brush here for green, and we're now returning brushes based on traffic statuses. So let's just go and build that. We have this converter. It looks like I've not implemented this other function. Let's just return null for 1 second out of convert back, and we built a converter. Now we need to go and plug this in. Essentially what we'll do is go to our XAML page over here, and we're going to have to use a custom namespace. So what we'll do is just pop up here and we'll say, let's say XML and S custom equals, and we'll use our own assembly, which is called conversion, so that's fine. So this is just a XAML convention as the way in which we can go ahead and refer to a CLR namespace within XAML, calling this custom at that point. So we can now declaratively in the XAML declare one of those converter classes. We can put it into a resource, so user control.resources. And into that resource we can add a new resource, which is going to be a custom converter. We'll give it a key, which is going to be my converter, and just define it like so. And now essentially what we're doing is defining one of those classes in our resources. We can then say that when we do this status down here, converter equals, we're going to look up a static resource which is called my converter. And that's now saying how we go from essentially traffic light statuses to the fill of this ellipse. Let's go and see if we can build that code. Let's go run. And we can see that our traffic light has gone red. And if we pop back to the code, or perhaps we pop back to the XAML here for a second. Let's just pop back to the XAML. And we'll add something else into the UI here. Let's just throw into this grid a couple of rows. So we'll have some row definitions. And in there we'll have a couple of row definitions. And into the second row we'll just put a button. And we'll put that into grid.row of 1. And we'll have click equals on click. So now we've got a button on the UI as well as an ellipse. And we can just pop to the code behind here. And let's just write an event handler for on click. Okay, so we've got one of those in there. And let's have this thing move the traffic light along. So we actually lost our reference to the traffic light. We can get it back. We can say traffic light TL equals layout route dot data context as traffic light. That's one way to get it back, or we could have kept it as a member variable. Let's say int I equals TL dot status, and we'll just cast that as an integer. To get that back, we'll say I++. And we'll just say that if I is bigger than the maximum value of that enumeration, which is go, then we'll say I equals 0. And we'll finally go ahead and say traffic light dot status equals traffic status of I. We'll go and run that, and we should be able to at least use our button to advance along through traffic statuses, so that we can say that we go from red to amber to green. We don't go the right direction, actually, we're just going round. Red, amber, green is what we do. But that's okay. You get the idea that we're changing the object model, we're going through that conversion routine, and colors are coming back from what is essentially an enumeration. And that's because we've got our converter in place. It's not easy for us to have input into our ellipse and allow somebody to set the color. But if this was a two-way input experience, we could also implement convert back to go from a color to one of these enumerated values. That would be something we can easily reverse the process to make that happen. But hopefully you get the idea as to how we can write converters, and once we've got converters we can even declaratively plug them into XAML. So here we are declaring one of those with a key, and then we go ahead and say when we are doing this data binding we want to use this specific converter in order to make that work.